Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Texas A&M has sent many a former student to combat, from the Spanish-American War to the War on Terror. Many from the classes of the 50s and the 60s served in Vietnam, including Lieutenant Colonel Durwood Lewis, F-4 backseater, who saw a great deal of combat in his 12-month assignment, 1 year out of more than 20 years of service to the United States Air Force. Meet Durwood Lewis of College Station. Durwood, it's a pleasure to have you on Veterans of the Valley. Let's start off. You're a Summerville guy, a Summerville Yawa guy, graduated from A&M in 1960. Talk a little bit about College Station and Texas A&M and sort of what it was like in the 50s, late 50s and 1960 as they got closer to the Vietnam War.
Well, when I was a student at A&M was like being on Wake Island.
Yeah.
There was nothing here to speak of. We had the North Gate, the South Gate, and then you could go to Bryan. But for the most part, it was the campus.
Right.
And we could go to movies, and that was just about the extent of our entertainment.
Right.
It took us 2 or 3 hours to get to Houston. It took us 4 hours to get to Dallas, 2 or 3 hours to get to Waco, and a couple hours to get to Austin. So, when I was in the Air Force flying with Mac, we would stage out of Wake Island, and Wake Island is just one little 2.5 mile island out in the middle of the Pacific.
Right.
And it was very much, I told everybody it reminded me of College Station.
College Station was Wake
Yeah.
Island. Before we forget, I want to mention one of the veterans that we've had the honor of having on this show is Lewis Hudson
Right.
from World War II. And you said that Lewis was actually your principal and your scoutmaster when you were young, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Him and Boots Simmons and there was a lot of those guys, Mr. Dwight Look, that
Right.
came back from World War II. Those were all my heroes when I was growing up.
Right. You went to Air Force ROTC, went to pilot school, washed out at pilot school, but then you went to navigator school in Harlingen. Sort of take us from your graduation from Texas A&M and sort of how your entry into the military and how that went.
Well, as you indicated, I went to pilot school. I was there for 9 months and I washed out, and then they sent me to navigator school. It was interesting, in my navigator class, I think all of us except one guy were all had washed out of pilot school.
Mm-hmm.
So we weren't real happy campers. But we accepted it and did our best in navigator school and did fairly well. Navigator school at that time was about a 10-month program. When we graduated from there, we had 2 choices. We could either go to, actually we had 3 choices. You could go to bomb nav school.
Right.
You could go to RIO school, which was radar intercept officer, backseaters and fighters.
Uh-huh.
Or you could go to EWO school, electronic warfare officer. Well, what I knew about electricity was that when you turn the light switch on, the light came on in the ceiling.
Uh-huh.
So I opted to go to navigator bomb school, which was about a 7-month program. And I didn't realize at the time, but the first 6 weeks was electronics.
Right.
And I knew I was an accounting major, so I had to learn about electronics and mathematics and all this stuff. Basic electricity, vacuum tubes, something that probably nobody around today knows what a vacuum tube is.
Right.
But that was before transistors, and so we had these huge amplifiers in the bomb nav system that we had to know when something went wrong with the radar. We had to be able to fix it in flight.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the big parts of navigator bomb school was knowing the system.
Right. Right. You went on, I know, to Travis Air Force Base
Mm-hmm.
in California, flew C-135 cargo planes there, and this was right about the time that people were getting a knowledge of Vietnam, and your first really taste of Vietnam came then when you were at Travis, and you were flying what were called sort of a missions to Hickam in Honolulu. Talk about that.
Well, what we were doing was the C-135s were the only jet transport on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, as you indicated, most of the action was in Vietnam. Most
Right.
people didn't know about Vietnam then. I got there to Travis in late '62,
Mm-hmm.
and most people couldn't spell Vietnam. I didn't know that much about it. I'd read a little bit about it. But I'd say 90% of our missions, we flew global. We had 2 navigators and 3 pilots on our crew. so we could have a crew duty day of 27 hours. So a typical mission, we would take off from Travis, fly to Honolulu, which was about a 5-hour flight, 2 hours on the ground to refuel and flight plan, and we'd fly from there to the Philippines, which was about 10 or 11-hour flight. And then we'd crew rest, or we'd turn our airplane over to another crew. They would fly to Saigon or Da Nang or Cam Ranh Bay or somewhere like that, then go to Japan, or they'd come back to Travis. And then the next airplane came through, we'd had our crew rest, we'd pick it up and we'd go to, and then we'd either come back to the Philippines or we'd go to Japan, and it was just, you know, hit or miss as to whether you went home or you flew a couple of shuttles.
Right. This was called staging, and you did
Right.
this until 1965. And then your military career took kind of a turn. You were assigned to Puerto Rico, and you were a hurricane hunter, a fascinating part of your career. Talk about that.
It was fascinating. It was, you know, I'd spent 2.5 years at Travis, and one of my jobs was to avoid weather in that airplane, you know, using the radar. So all of a sudden, we're looking for bad weather. And you know, all of us, it was a brand new outfit. So every one of us were new to this business, and the culture of everybody there was, we don't want to do this. You know, this is dumb. And so we had to actually determine the procedures for doing it, because nobody had ever done it before in C-130s. That's what we were flying there at C-130Bs. So we just took the documents for the airplane and decided what the document said was the best altitude to fly into bad weather was 10,000 feet. So that suddenly became the smart thing to do. So we penetrated hurricanes at 10,000 feet, and I can't remember what our airspeed was, but it was in the -1.
Right.
We determined what airspeed to fly.
Right.
So I was a young captain. I was the daddy navigator. I was the senior guy. There was one guy senior to me, but he was a stand Val guy, and so I was the scheduler and the trainer of all those navigators. There was only about 10 of us, but I was responsible for all those guys. And all of a sudden, I learned what they had taught me at A&M about accepting responsibility. I mean, it took me to, most people learn it a lot younger, but it took me to being a captain before I realized what they were really trying to teach me when I was at A&M about responsibility.
You talked about this time how you saw a lot of things that you had not seen before. You did this for 3 years or 4 hurricane seasons, actually. You flew a lot around what's known as the Devil's Triangle at the Sargasso Sea. Talk about that, and talk about the phenomenon which you saw, which is called St. Elmo's Fire also.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes when you get into weather, you build up a static charge on the airplane. And you get this phenomena called St. Elmo's Fire. It's written about in the Ancient Mariner.
Right.
And, you know, it frightened those sailors. And in 1965, it frightened Durwood Lewis. Because I remember I was back there doing my navigation stuff, and the pilot said, "Durwood, come up here and take a look." And, you know, I get up out of my seat and I look out the window and I went, "Whoa!" And the airplane was glowing.
Right.
It was this bluish, greenish, funny-looking glow on the props, on the wings. And, you know, it took me back. You know, you know, I didn't really know what it was when I first saw it. And somebody said St. Elmo's Fire, and then I remembered what I'd learned in high school literature about St. Elmo's Fire.
The wings and props were actually glowing green, right?
Right.
That's what you saw.
Glowing, ghostly-looking green. I mean, we were in weather, so it even glowed more than it normally would because it was reflecting off of that moisture in the air as well.
Right. Right.
So it was really I won't say frightening, but it made an impression.
We could do a whole show on that, talk about the typhoon that you went through called Victoria and all that, which was an especially scary one. But I want to move on. You went back to Travis Air Force Base, 141s. Talk about that, because that was sort of a job to where you transported people, you transported VIPs over to Vietnam. But then those C-41s would change into airvac, almost flying hospitals too. I know this was something that was very meaningful for you, and it really sort of brought the war home for you.
It really did. You know, when you see young guys that are just beat up and you know, crippled and all kinds of, you know, terrible wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And we would fly them up to, in those days, it's not like they do now in Iraq. They would stabilize them and take care of them for quite a while in Cameron Bay and other major hospital areas. And then, excuse me, once they were ready to transport, we'd pick them up in Cameron Bay and take them to Japan for probably more extensive care until they were ready to go back to the States. So we were picking them up. We weren't picking up critically. They'd gotten over the critical part of their injuries, but they were still banged up pretty bad, and they still needed a lot of care. And we would fly them. You know, we had flight nurses, and in some cases we had doctors on board, because if we had some pretty critical guys in there that we were taking back.
Right.
So it made a big impression on me, because I felt like I was not doing my part. You know, that I was, you know, pretty safe, and I just felt guilty. I was drawing my pay, you know, and getting flight pay and all this, and it just didn't seem like I was earning it.
Well, and you did something about that. As a matter of fact, you began to feel somewhat unchallenged, sort of, as you were as a navigator, and sort of talk about your conversion over to another aircraft, to the F-4.
As I told you, I walked out of the squadron one day and there was two F-4s sitting on the ramp, and I asked somebody, how do you get into those things? I understand they only fly about 4 hours. And whoever I was with said, you got to be nuts or crazy. And I said, well, I qualify. So I actually made a call to the personnel at headquarters Military Airlift Command, and I said, how do you get in F-4s? And they said, well, we're looking for F-4 guys. If you'll volunteer, we'll see what we can do. So I had to change my dream sheet. We call it the dream sheet, what you want to do in your career and all this stuff. And he told me to mail it to him, so I mailed it to him. In the meantime, I went on a trip to the Far East. When I got back, my wife picked me up at base ops, and she said, I got a call from Military Airlift headquarters, and they want to know if you wanted to leave in 3 weeks or 6 weeks. You know, and that's the first I'd heard, you know, that it got through that quick.
Uh-huh.
I opted for 6 weeks.
Indeed. You went to Florida to learn to be a backseater
Right.
in an F-4. Backseater, which a weapons systems officer, WSO, or I also learned from you, they're also called GIBS, which stands for guy in the back seat.
Right. Right.
Which is pretty simple.
Yes.
Volunteered to go to Vietnam, and you served in Vietnam as an F-4 backseater from December to December 1971 to 1972. Talk about what your mission there, what your job was there, just generally what happened in that year.
Well, again, I had, by this time I'd made major, and I was a young major, and there was 2 major navigators in my squadron, and again, the other major was senior to me, so he was a stand of Val guy. So I became Daddy Gibb, and so I was responsible for training, even though I was the newest guy on the block. Because I was a major, I was responsible. And so I became the navigator scheduler.
Right.
And that was a kind of an interesting thing, because you wanted to schedule the right guys for the particular missions you were flying. And you'd ask about what kind of missions we flew. When I first got there, we were essentially doing most of our missions in Laos, and we were flying gunship escort missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail at night. So the first about 3 months, I was a night fighter. I hardly saw the daylight.
Right.
We'd fly about a 5-hour mission, and what we would do is we'd get with one of these gunships, and when they took anti-aircraft fire, we'd suppress it with bombs. So if a gun came up, we would bomb that gun, and usually just play around with them a little bit, because it was hard to hit one at night. You just have to shoot at their tracers or bomb at their tracers.
Right, right. I asked you some of your particular missions that you remember, and you talked about one time where you all were just sitting around, not much going on, and you were told to get in your F-4 and take off quick. You were given some pictures to as far as what your target was, and that turned into a memorable mission.
Yes.
Take us through that.
Well, the mission was scheduled. We were supposed to bomb some targets in southern North Vietnam. And I can't remember if it was after the briefing or after we'd gone out to the airplanes. They canceled the mission because of weather.
Mm-hmm.
And they put us on what was called QRF, Quick Reaction Force. And so we went ahead and cocked the airplane. In other words, we got the airplane ready to go. And then we went back to the squadron and thought we would just sit around for the rest of the morning, and then they would cancel that too. About 9 o'clock, they came running in and said, you got to ASAP go as soon as possible. You know, we jump in the airplane. The front seater's cranking the engines, and I'm sitting back there in the back seat. Where are we going? You know, he didn't know and I didn't know, and about that time, our ops officer crawled up the ladder and handed me some pictures. Mm-hmm. And he showed me the target, and the coordinates of the target were written on the picture. So I, quick like a bunny, pulled out my charts and started drawing lines to get to the target, because first we had to refuel, then we had to go from refueling to the target. We didn't have a control time, which was fortunate, because then I didn't have to back off of what time we had to be over the target. Mm-hmm. We just had to hit the target. So the pilot's getting the airplane, and we're taxiing out, and he yells at me. He wants to see the picture. Of course, he's got to see it too. So it's hard to describe the distance between the front seat and the back seat. It's not like, we're not mm-hmm. like this. It was, and I had to kind of make a little paper airplane and sail it up to him.
Right. And
land in his lap, and he would taxi the airplane. I didn't have I couldn't taxi because I couldn't see. And he was taxiing the airplane and studying the pictures. About that time, we got out the arming area. They armed us. When they arm you, you've got to have your hands visible.
Right.
So you don't drop something on them or shoot some of the forward shooting ordnance at the crews. So then we took off. As soon as we took off, we had to refuel. About that time, you know, it was one of these deals where nothing was going right. One of the airplanes, we were a 4-ship, aborted, so we were down to a 3-ship. As soon as we took off, you know, my front seater, who was my squadron commander, Roger Myram, says, Durwood, you take the airplane and let me look at these pictures. So I'm flying the airplane back there, and he's looking at the pictures, and I realized that my throttle linkage was disconnected.
Right.
All I could do was advance the throttles. I couldn't retard them. So every time I had to take some power off, I'd have to tell him, you know, take off a couple.
Right.
So then we hit the tanker. He refuels. We get off on the wing, and the other 2 guys are refueling. Pilots and navigators have to talk with their hands. And he told me to fly. So I'm flying the airplane. He's still studying.
Yep.
Studying the pictures. And every time we started slipping back, I was okay. I could forward, you know, push the throttles forward to inch up on the tanker. But every time we'd start slipping back, I start going forward, I'd have to ask him for it. So I was interrupting him, and it was just a mess, you know.
I'm gonna stop you there. We're gonna go to some pictures, then we're gonna come back to that mission, because that mission got even more interesting after that. There are some pictures that Lieutenant Colonel Lewis supplied to us, and we're going to go through them real quick, and we're going to start early. There you are as a Texas A&M cadet. Junior, right there. So that would have been about 1959.
Yes.
All right. Good haircut. All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on.
I had hair.
Yeah. You were a bigger fellow back then, too. All right. Let's move on. This was a parade in Fort Worth. This was when Texas A&M was playing TCU, I guess, and this was a corps march through downtown Fort Worth. I thought that was very interesting. And that's you right there, the
front right.
Front right in, of that company right there. Yeah. And you can see the date, October 17th, 1959. All right, let's move on. Talk about this.
That's my navigator class. It's interesting, the guy kneeling on as you're looking at the picture on the far right kneeling, he's an Aggie too. Right. Bob Gretzel. He was class of 59. And then on the front row, and the 2 guys in the front row on the other side were Burmese officers. I see. One of them had been a guerrilla fighter during World War II. The rest of them were all these guys that had washed out of pilot school. Right. You're back row, 3rd from the right, the tall one. That's correct. Yeah, there you are. Okay, let's move on. That is my squadron when I was in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
The 469th Attack Fighter Squadron at Korat Royal Thai Air Base, Thailand.
Right.
And that's me in the back row, I think
Third from the right?
Third from the right.
There you are. Back row, third from the right. Okay. Move on. There you are on the left, and that's your front seater.
That's my front seater, Argyle P. Atwood from Georgia.
Right.
He went to school at the University of Georgia, really good pilot. I mean, fine pilot. I would go anywhere with him.
Durwood, you were a big old boy. You filled up that back seat, didn't you?
I did. You know, this is actually, this picture was taken, we're about to crawl up the ladder.
Right.
I mean, go on a mission. I can't remember which one it was, but I know we were getting ready. You can see my helmet on the wing.
Right.
And you can see the Mark 82 500-pound bombs right under my helmet.
Yes, sir. All right, next picture.
This was a happy day. I took this picture on my last combat mission. We were coming in to land at Korat, and we were a 4-ship, and I was in number 3. And I took that picture as we were on initial approach.
All right.
That's just a picture that I took when we were on a strike mission, and one of the airplanes is on the tanker. We had just refueled, and I just thought it was kind of an interesting picture.
Exactly. Amazing picture that you took. There you are.
That's me, again, about to saddle up and go. I had a front seater named John Carr that brought his camera, and he took that picture. And as soon as he took the picture, I got in the airplane and we took off and flew a mission.
All right. Talk about this.
This is one of my favorite pictures. It's Thud Ridge. We had just we were on a escort mission. We had escorted some chaff bombers. One of them had gotten shot down by a MiG, and when I took that picture, we were chasing a MiG-21. Our number 3 had just shot a MiG-21 down, and we were chasing the other one. We were down on the deck, and you can't see it there, but they were shooting at us. We were over the Red River, and they were shooting at us. And I may have been upside down when I took that picture. I'm not sure.
But that ridge that we're looking at that goes from top left to down right, that actually points
at Hanoi.
Points at Hanoi. So that was your
and the reason
navigation tool.
Yeah, the reason it's called Thud Ridge is because in the early bombing missions against Hanoi, the F-105s, we call them thuds affectionately because that's the noise they make when they hit the ground.
Oh.
And they use that to shield them from the radar.
Yep.
They'd come in, on one side of that thing or the other, and they would kind of shield them from the SAMs.
All right. Next picture. That's a celebration.
That's after I just completed my what we call an EOT, end of tour mission, and we were celebrating a little bit.
Okay.
And this is kind of a sad day, actually. That was the last mission I flew in the Air Force.
Right.
In Alaska.
In Alaska.
Didn't realize that there was going to be anybody with a camera there
Right.
when I came
At
back.
Elmendorf?
Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska.
Yes, sir. Okay.
A dreary day.
All right. Amazing pictures. We don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to go back to that mission. You were flying, and all of a sudden you got a SAM warning light that a missile was coming at you.
Actually, we had a SAM warning, and what happens is when the SAM is launched, the antenna is exposed, and they're talking to that missile, and we pick that signal up, and we get a red light that says launch.
Right.
Well, at the same time, we had another light that says A/S, which meant the azimuth sector, which meant that not only did we have a launch, but that radar was painting our airplane. So we were the target. So the procedure at that point is to scan and try to find the missile. You got to find it to defeat it, see it. And as I scanned through the area, I saw the SAM. I could see where it launched at our what I'd call our 1230 position.
Right.
And I told the pilot, I said, well, I've got a SAM at 12 o'clock, and it's guiding, which meant it's on us. It's like, if I can talk with my hands again, it's like the missile is coming, and every time our airplane moves, that missile was moving with us, just like it was in formation. My pilot, Major Colonel Myram, didn't say anything. And I had so much confidence in him that I didn't really think too much about because he didn't talk that much. And I kind of watched and I said, "Sir, it's still guiding." And he still didn't say anything. And it looked like to me it was going to come right through the canopy and hit me between the eyes. And I ducked. And when I ducked, there's an ejection handle between my legs, and there's another rope over my head. I put my hand on both of them because I thought I might be going for a walk that day.
Uh-huh.
And so when I ducked, I put my hands on both those ejection handles in case I had to get out. And about the time that I ducked, Colonel Myron pulled about 6 or 8 G's. I don't know which, but whatever it was, I was wearing this helmet, which weighed a couple of pounds, and then when you pull 6 G's, that multiplies by 6.
Yes, sir.
And so I was totally doubled over, couldn't see anything. And about that time, I heard the SAM, and I heard our wingman say, "Lead your hit," which I knew. He didn't have to tell us we were hit. I knew we were hit. But I couldn't move because he was still, pull all these G's. And when he came off of it, I looked back and I could see our smoke trail. I could see the detonation from the SAM, and our smoke trail went right through the middle of it. And I was looking around the cockpit looking for fire warnings or something, and my squadron commander, who was flying the airplane, says, "We're hit." I said, "Roger that." And he said, "Stay with me," or something like that. And I said, "Don't worry, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere."
We're just about out of time, but the end of that story is that you went ahead and hit your target. You got back to Thailand. You
Yep.
got back safely. It was an incredible, incredible experience. You were out of Vietnam in December of 1972, and your career took you to Little Rock, to Holloman. It took you eventually back to Travis, to Elmendorf in Alaska. And then after you were out of the service, I know you were 16 years at Texas A&M. And believe it or not, we're out of time. There's so much more to tell, but we are out of time. But thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
All right. Durwood Lewis says he wasn't much of a desk guy in the Air Force, wanted to be where the action was, and whether it was flying into the eye of hurricanes or into SAM or MiG battles in Vietnam, he saw plenty of action. We salute him for his service, and we wish him and his wife Bernice well in their retirement. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.